overview of the Office of the Performance Auditor. And also, we're going to have a work session on our board goals that we've been working on. We're going to first start with the presentation, the much anticipated presentation on the Office of Performance Audit. And we have a fairly tight, can you make quicker? We have a fairly tight schedule on this one, and we want to make sure we get people's questions answered. So I'm going to suggest on this one, they were told they had 10 minutes to present. So we're going to let them present first. Save your questions for the end, and then we'll open it up for board members to ask questions. And I would ask everybody to keep in mind that also for the next board meeting, we have the charter, not for the committee, but the charter for the performance auditor function on the agenda for about, hopefully this will answer many of the questions. And I would say that if you don't get all your questions answered tonight, they can talk about audits forever. So you can take it offline. So with that, please introduce yourself and
thank you very much for the opportunity to present tonight. I really appreciate it. Like she said, I really love talking about this, and for those of you who have already had a chance to talk to me, you understand how much I love this, so pardon my enthusiasm. I'm going to stick to the basics here and get started. First, just a little bit about myself. I've been auditing local governments throughout Western Washington for the last 10 years. That includes a variety of school districts of multiple sizes, from really small to the really large. And I was also the senior internal auditor at Seattle Public Schools for the last year, so I am really excited to bring all of this experience here to kind of get the Office of Internal Audit started here. I don't think Mary Catherine needs an introduction. You guys have already met her, but I did want to point out here that just as I found out at last board meeting, she's a graduate of Grant High School. So I feel really lucky to have her, you know, me being new to the area, so to have her on the team and be able to provide the local PPS perspective adds a lot of value to the work that we'll be able to do. So that's really exciting. Okay, so, yeah, Grant High School graduate. We have, again, limited time, so I'm sticking to 4 basic steps here, okay? The first is really exciting, and that is auditing standards, okay? So these are the 2 auditing standards that we will be adhering to. The first is the Institute of Internal Auditors, the IIA. Their framework, or their professional standards, are called IPPF, and it's also called the Red Book. And then we will also adhere to GAGIS, which is also known as the Yellow Book. And in case you're wondering why we call it the Red Book and the Yellow Book, auditors are very creative in our naming conventions. And so I just wanted to let you know, Red Book, Yellow Book. But moving forward, what I'd like to just call these is auditing standards. So I don't want to bore you with IPPF or GAGIS or what either of those 2 things might mean. Moving forward, when I refer to auditing standards, I'll be referring to either one or both of them. We'll adhere to both of them. As members of the IIA, Mary Catherine and I are required to adhere to their standards, so you guys kind of get a bonus because we'll adhere to both. Here, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the value that is added by following professional auditing standards. The Council of Greater City Schools has issued a white paper about internal auditing, and they recommend the adoption of a auditing standards, which PPS has already done. So that's really great. And why is this important? You know, it takes a lot of time and effort up front, especially in the first year, to establish all the processes and procedures that are necessary for adhering to these standards. So this is, I really want to talk to you guys about the value that will be added here. this is how we will earn your trust, not just the trust of the school board, but also district management and the PPS community as a whole. The value added is making sure that we're adhering to those standards. So I really value the standards, and I love them a lot, in case you were wondering. Next, I would just want to talk a little bit about a definition for performance auditing. Now, I took this definition, which is a two-part slide here, straight from the Auditing Standards, and so I'm not going to read it to you, but what I thought would add value here is for Mary Catherine and I to kind of explain how audit objectives might look here at PPS. So we have a couple of examples. Auditing objectives here, we're going to talk about performance effectiveness, internal control, compliance. These are the types of audits that we might do. So we're going to just kind of give you a little bit of an example for each of those. So the first is an example of program effectiveness, and Mary Catherine's going to give us a couple examples.
So the examples I'm going to give are assessing the extent to which legislative, regulatory, and district goals and objectives are achieved. The other one is determining whether a program produced intended results or produced results that were not consistent with the program's objectives. And the other example I have here is assessing the reliability, the validity, and the relevance of performance measures that are going to be used.
So these are the types of objectives that we would have in an audit when we're considering program effectiveness. So we also have a couple of examples for an audit where our objectives are based on internal controls.
Okay, so one example would be resources are used in compliance with laws, regulations, and other requirements. And we just heard about Student Success App. So we're going to be really watching those. And then the management information, such as performance measures and reports are complete, accurate, and consistent to support the performance and the decision making.
And then also for compliance objectives, we just have one example for compliance objectives.
Okay, and the purpose of the program, the manner in which it is to be conducted, the services delivered, the outcomes, or the population it serves is in compliance with the provisions of laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements or other requirements.
So, in case you want to know more, which I know that each of you are burning to do so, in the appendix, the very last page of the presentation, the first link to Audit Defined is there's a link, and I put the page numbers for that specific section there, so it's like 4 pages, and it gives a lot of great examples of how specific audit objectives can be used. So if you want more information, lots of quality reading time there, but that's what, so, and then the last one, perspective analysis. I'm not gonna lie, I had to Google what that was, and so your audit team will need to go to some training before we embark on any objectives in that kind of category, so I kind of left it out for now. So the last part of performance auditing, which I think is highly overlooked, is recognition and appreciation. Auditing standards provide auditors the opportunity to point out opportunities for improvement, which is in general an indication that maybe something's not as good as it should be. So I want to express how much we value the internal controls and the process and procedures that the district currently has. So even though we go to do an audit and we test like 10 things and 9 are wrong, and we're going to write about the one thing that they did, or 9 are all right, oh my gosh, 9 are all right, and yeah, just that was to wake everybody up, okay? So 9 are all right, but the one, and I'm going to write this report, and that's not fair in my opinion, so we're going to work with the audit committee to establish some sort of recognition and appreciation to also acknowledge what great work the district does I don't have a report I can write for that because that's not auditing standards, but we're going to develop a way to make sure that we're recognizing it because it's just so often overlooked and seems so unfair. I've been audited and it seems so unfair. So I just want to do our part to acknowledge greatness when we see it. So moving on, ethics, independence, and professional judgment. Hold your excitement. I'm not going to have the opportunity to talk about all of these bullet points, but one of the things I really did want to talk about in relationship to ethics is the public interest. This is something unique to government auditors that you may not necessarily have heard about from non-government related auditing. So public interest is really where we, sorry, hold on a second. It's defined as the collective well-being of the community of people and the entities that the auditors serve. And I know that's a lot, but I thought it was really awesome when Mary Catherine and I were meeting with Director Bailey. He said he would like for us to think about the PPS students as who we're really accountable for. They are the boss of us. And I think that really speaks to the essence behind public interest. Now, we have lots of bosses in the work that we do, but that really speaks to the public interest, and that's unique to government auditing that may not necessarily be in a private industry. So I just wanted to touch on that for the ethics part. Independence. In all matters, the auditors, we gotta be independent. There's no way of really saying it in any other way. It's just imperative. We must maintain our independence. So independence of mind seems somewhat obvious. So independence of appearance, I think I wanted to just kind of give you guys a few, what I'm going to call transparency commitments to help everybody understand what it is that we'll do and how we'll be accountable and independent. So one of the things that I like to have is an open calendar. You can look at my calendar. I set it to public. You can look at it anytime, see who I'm meeting with, what are we doing, and you can ask me any questions. If you just want to know what we're up to, give me a call. But I also like to keep a very public calendar so you can see what's going on. I'm also developing a Office of Internal Performance Audit share drive, which I can give read-only access to everybody. I really will be sharing more details about this with the audit committee, but I will give each of the board members read-only access to it, so you can, at any point you want to know what we're doing, you can check it out. I've also made a commitment to do meeting minutes for any regularly scheduled meetings that we have. So, you know, and then I also just started a audit activity briefing that I'll be sending out to the audit committee. These documents will be stored in the Office of Internal Audit Performance shared document, so you'll have access to it at any time if you ever want to know what we're up to. Again, you know, I really value transparency, and so if you guys think of anything else that I can do to be transparent and ensure our independence, please let me know because we welcome suggestions. This is, according to the current PPS board policy, this is our reporting structure of how we report to what goes to the full board versus what goes to the audit committee. This is just per your policy, but I also, as I've been meeting with each of you, I have asked what level of engagement do you guys want with us, and I'm committed to giving you that level, whatever level of engagement you would like. If you aren't on the audit committee but you're still super interested and you want to meet every now and then, give me a call. I'd be happy to meet with you and give you whatever updates that you would like. But if not, it's available on the shared drive and you can take a look at it, whatever we're up to there as well. And I'm sure all of you will want to be on the audit committee now. Just in case you don't, I'm gonna reach out and engage with you guys at the level in which you're interested in. I would say a minimum, we would like to meet with each of you once every 6 months just to touch base and do a risk assessment. So that's the bare minimum, and it's okay if that's what you want as well. So this, thank you, Director Bailey, for sending me your note on this. And I actually put this in the wrong position, so I'm just going to skip it for now and come back to it. The last part of this 3 things, ethics, independence, is professional judgment. And I really just want to talk about professional skepticism. This is my favorite part of my job description. It just means by job description I get to ask all the questions, and I can't ever assume anything is what it is. I need to see audit evidence and I need to follow up on it. So I really love professional skepticism. It's my favorite part. I'm somewhat global. I tend to trust everybody, but I really have to see audit evidence. So never take it as offense. It's part of my job description. I'll be asking, if you say something, I'm gonna ask for your receipts. It's just part of the job. So moving on here. Okay, so scope. I've done my very best to not read from each of these slides, but for the scope, I really couldn't find a way to I couldn't find a way to re-say this in a different way. You know, the scope is intentionally broad, and so I just want to read, so bear with me here. The scope of internal audit activities encompasses, but is not limited to, objective examination of evidence of governance, risk assessment, control processes for the board, the audit committee, management, and outside parties. Oh my gosh. So if you guys have any questions, we're getting really close to the end, and I can come back to this, okay? But it's intentionally broad because nothing is really outside the scope, but it is really important that you guys take ownership of the audit activity and feel ownership of it, because we can only present you risks. We do a risk assessment, we come to the board and or to the audit committee, we say, here are all the risks, and we really get feedback to prioritize those risks and put them in somewhat of a queue for deciding what are we going to do. There's only 2 of us, so there's not a lot of topics we're going to get to, so we really have to get feedback from you guys to prioritize each of those risks and cover the most significant items here. So that is everything I have about the scope as well. Next, I would like to point you guys to this document that I included with my presentation called the Auditor's Statement of Independence. So this is just a draft. I am working to kind of get all of the terminology updated, you know, the Office of Internal Performance Audit. We're going to get our terminology correct, and Mary Catherine and I have decided that our acronym is going to be OIPA. So
we couldn't have IPA only.
We could just do IPA, right? But so we decided Office of Internal Performance Audit. So we flushed this out a little bit. Okay.
IPA would immediately put a smiley face.
IPA. See, she warned me against it. She's like, no to IPA. I'm just teasing. But we'll get all that. So this is just a draft, but I wanted to give it to you so you can see all of the assertions and evaluations that we take for each engagement. So there is a very thorough process that we go through, and we do an evaluation for each engagement. Typically, when you're auditing from the external, you're doing one of these for an entity as a whole. We have to go through this assessment for every single audit engagement to consider any threats to our independence. And as you can see, it's a lot of pages. And the last part includes the chart that I had in the wrong place. So this is where I really meant to put it, is after this slide. But as you can see, it's also what we use as the framework for the determination of whether or not we're independent in order to perform an audit. And I have an example to walk through this with you guys, but I'm trying to get through my 10 minutes first. So that we'll have that be the first question, and I'll walk you through, but I really want to get through the last piece. So, next steps. The next steps are, okay, so the next steps, I have made just a few minor edits to the audit charter, the last version that's been floating around. I made a few little tweaks. I added back in the term professional skepticism, and so I provided that, and we'll discuss it in the audit committee. And once it has gone through the audit committee review, it will come back to the full board for review and final approval. Similar to the board policy related to performance auditing, I have a couple of questions, really more so than comments, but I really want to discuss those with the audit committee, and then any recommendations that I might have related to any tweaks or anything would come from, move forward out after we talk about it. And then again, our recognition and appreciation. We're going to come up with a plan, and we'll present that at the audit committee also. So while this is also happening, we are actually still doing some auditing. So my understanding is there's kind of been a phase 1 of the audit plan that has been approved, and that includes the contracts audit that Mary Catherine has already started, and then also a P card review. So as I am working on the risk assessment, some of the meetings will be, I might have to wait so as I have downtime in performing the risk assessment, I'll be working on the P cards review. And then after these 2 audits moving forward, we'll be selecting audits based off of formal risk assessments. And auditing standards do require an annual risk assessment. So in order to be in compliance, we'll be doing that risk assessment right away. And backup is I'll be working on the P cards. Last, what do I need from you guys to keep me going? And just ask, I know that you guys are all working on audit committee charters. And so I would really ask that we prioritize the audit committee charter for, because it does apply to the work that Mary Catherine and I will be doing. So I'm hoping to provide you guys some resources at the next audit committee meeting, so you can have some resources that will help you draft that. And then just timely consideration of the final versions of the audit charter and the board policy. So that's everything that I have. So I would like to congratulate you guys. We made it through. I think I did okay on time. I kind of lost a little bit of track, but we went faster than the last timed one. So we have some questions and comments and opportunities, but here's the appendix, that first bullet point right there. So it's pages 14 or 10 through 14. That's where you're going to get a lot more details about what audit objectives could be included if you're super interested. There's a couple of pages, a lot of pages about ethics, independence, and professional judgment. And then the statement of independence I provided. Okay, so questions. And I'm going to go backwards to this, which you guys can't see, I apologize. But I brought an example. So is that okay if I start with questions and let Director Bailey's be the first question? Okay, so his question or thought or comment rather was, it would be great if I had an example of how we're going to use this framework to help us make decisions. And it just so happens that we currently have an example that I can provide with you guys. So what I have been provided is, this is a memo to the audit committee, and it's from Deputy Superintendent Claire, and this is the update on the recent fraudulent ACH transactions. So I was asked to take a look at this. So this is the actions taken or in progress or planned. This is what management has decided to do and to implement these items to ensure the one situation doesn't happen again. So this is what we would call a non-audit service, which technically we're allowed to provide. But when we do non-audit services, it's really important that we take into consideration any potential threats to our independence. So this is a great example to walk through this lovely slide here. So the very first box there, which is difficult to read, is, we need to evaluate the circumstances for threats to independence. If there's no threat, it goes straight down, proceed, do the audit. If there is a potential threat, then we have to go to the right. Okay, so what I am considering a potential threat is a threat to self-review. So what is a threat to self-review? It would be, is there a risk that subsequent to providing this non-audit service, we could potentially show up in accounts payable and do an audit, and at that time we would be auditing something that we made recommendations about via a non-audit service. So that's a threat to independence. So we need to go through the rest of this to flesh this out, right? So the next question is the threat related to non-audit services? If the answer is yes, we have to go to the right and keep going down this little series of questions. So the answer is yes, so we're going to go to the right. So does the non-audit service impair independence per government auditing standards? And the answer to that is no. Technically, we are allowed to provide non-audit services. So if the answer was yes, you can see that independence is impaired. We would not be able to move forward. But auditing standards do allow us to provide non-audit services. So the answer is no, so we're going to go to the next bullet point here. And that is, was the non-audit service requested by the entity's management? So my understanding is that this kind of came from the audit community, but also management as well. So the answer is yes. And so the next assessment, does management have suitable skills, knowledge, and experience? So do we have any concerns about management's ability to request this? And do we feel like they're making this non-audit service request because they don't have the adequate knowledge, skills, or experience? So if they have all of those things and we have no risk to any of those things, then we can say yes and move forward. But if the answer is no, we think that no, they don't have enough knowledge, experience, or skills, then the answer would be no, we would not be able to do the audit, because that would risk our independence in relationship to a risk of superseding or acting on behalf of management. So we can't do that. That's against auditing standards. So yes, they have all the necessary skills, they have all the necessary knowledge, there's no risk there. So we say yes. So we are required to document the consideration and understanding with management and those charged with governance about what exactly we're going to do. We have to write all this stuff down. This is so exciting. I mean, I don't know why you guys are like looking down or sad, but this is like great stuff here, okay? So, thank you, Director Bailey, for this lovely opportunity to walk you guys through this, because I really wanted to. Anyways, okay, so now we're down here. Does the non-audit service involve preparing accounting records and or financial statements? If the answer is no, we have to go to a whole different figure, which I didn't give you guys. But the answer is, or if the answer is yes. The answer is no, so now we have to go back over here. So this is really exciting stuff here. So now we have to evaluate the threat for significance. Is there a significant risk that when we come back to do an accounts payable audit in the future, that we are going to actually review or have to give an opinion on something that we gave as a recommendation as part of a non-audit service? So you see how minute some of these things are, but this is what we do, and this is a real assessment that we do on every single audit engagement that we do. We have to think about each one of these, so I don't mean to overemphasize it or get too excited about it, but it really is what we do for each engagement, and it's kind of why I tried to highlight some of the more significant things, because we take these things very seriously. But ultimately, as you go, the threat is not significant, so we moved down and we said, yes, we can proceed. So this is, I kind of highlighted how to go, and we concluded with yes. We can take a look at this and see if there's anything that perhaps we might think the management missed, or if we have any questions, then this is something we would be able to do in the form of a non-audit service.
And we have to explain, the other reason we have to do this as well is whenever we have those external reviews, 5 years, or 3 years here, during the yellow book, every 3 years, they will be looking at these, is to make sure that we follow the standards. So it's really critical that we follow.
And we have to
this
document
assessment.
it. I mean, I'm going to give you guys read-only access, and you guys will hold back your enthusiasm, but the documentation required for this is so, it will be there, I promise you. So feel free to check it out if you're interested.
Any other questions?
Yes.
I've been waiting now. I'm so excited to ask the question. So the structure here, which I totally understand, it is interesting, right? So the auditor is hired by the board. I think has administrative management with Deputy Superintendent Hertz, right? But it's hired by the board. Will you ever be able to audit the board?
Absolutely, it's in there. I actually put that in here. So when you look at the scope one, here, the controls and processes for the board, audit committee, and I specifically put board/audit.
No, I saw that.
That was intentional.
So walk me. So one of the things I've usually worked with independently elected auditors, which have their own disadvantages because they're really politicians, but the advantage is they have that independence because they're elected directly. But even with independently elected auditors, I've noticed a real reluctance to criticize other elected officials. They're really happy to go after management, but they're really reluctant to sort of go after the elected officials. And I think it's, again, I don't know exactly why. But walking through this, what you just walked through in terms of your ethics, independent professional judgment, how would you ever audit the board who hires and fires you? It seems like that's an inherent conflict of interest. And I'm not, maybe that is, I guess I'm just sort of from the very beginning establishing if it is an inherent conflict of interest, we just need to know that you won't be able to effectively audit the board. But if it's not, I'm curious how you get around it.
So, in a much more mature conversation that I would like to have with the audit committee at some point, best practices do recommend that you have in your internal auditors, the primary one for myself, the contract where we can't be fired without cause. So that helps provide that level of independence, so we could. So I can provide you guys with the best practices and some of the ALGA recommendations related to that type of language that you may want to consider for a future contract. I'll say that my personal hiring here at the district was not exactly the way I would have expected it to be in relationship to the way that it was at Seattle Public Schools in relationship to their independent auditing department. No judgment or anything. I'm so happy to be here and I'm so glad that it all worked out. But what I will say is in that environment, which in the white paper issued by the Greater Council of Grade Schools. Yes, thank you very much. I should know this because my director at Seattle co-wrote the paper, and so we've talked about this a lot. But in there, Seattle is identified as best practices specifically as it relates to the reporting structure. So with that being said, I would love to provide a lot more information. It is an inherent risk, and that is why there are some best practices and recommendations by the LGA to kind of include some of that information and language in your auditor's contract.
Great. No, I look forward to having that conversation in the committee, because I think it's really essential that you have the ability and freedom to audit both management and the board. But it's going to be, I look forward to the conversation.
With that also being said, I would just like to make some personal assurances that I'm not afraid to audit, regardless of whether or not it's in my contract. When I worked at the state auditor's office, we oftentimes wrote letters to the board for their less than adequate oversight responsibilities. So I'm not afraid to make those kind of, but also you as a board member, and you also have to understand, if I come to you with a risk assessment that says high risk, non-compliance related to the board, and I'm coming to you with feedback, you guys are also providing the feedback to help prioritize and identify the audits based off my risk assessment. So there's a dual thing here. So I would really welcome a more detailed conversation about how we'll ensure that we're independent and can serve the students and community of PPS as well, public interest.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's a huge conflict of interest for elected officials deciding what you audit and what you don't, because it may or may not make us look good or bad. So figuring out all the ways.
So there's a dual.
Figuring out all the ways we sort of build that.
So
those
just
safeguards
a
in the process.
Point on that is that this is how we had the current plan, which was the auditor, Mary Catherine at the time, brought, based on an analysis of the risk assessment that had been done previously and the Secretary of State's audit, came up with the potential audit items and brought it to the committee. So it wasn't like board members said, like, here's what we want you to audit, or don't put that on the list. So
So this first year, it's coming directly from the Secretary of State's report?
Well, the two items we had, since we didn't have a current risk assessment, we had a previous risk assessment.
It was from the
and
2016.
And the Secretary of State's audit, and I mean, there's plenty of it, but the point I'm trying to make is, it didn't come either, items didn't come from either board members, or board members didn't say, don't audit that. It was the auditor's recommendation to the committee, and then there was a committee discussion, and at the public meeting of the committee, there was feedback on the various potential audit items from both our community, not just the 3 board members, but also the 2 community members who serve on the committee, and also staff.
Helping to overcome the conflict of interest through transparency is what you're saying.
Right,
Like,
and they're the originators of it, so.
Right, but being transparent so that even if the board, because we still do decide what they audit, if we were to change, it would be very clear that we had made that change, which is an effective way to do it. There are also the ways, and we don't need to talk about it, we can talk about it in committee. I mean, there also are ways to talk about maybe having a committee have one more community member than board member on it, which is also a way to assure there is some.
There's some pluses and minuses of that. So when you ask the outside community members, there's like, you guys are ultimately accountable to the voters and for any of the expenditures of funds. So at the end of the day, you should be driving things. Also, if our role is not just to hire but manage and evaluate, having a non-board member, having non-board members participate in that would be probably problematic, because our policy says it's the board's role. So currently, the 2 community members are ex officio. But for at least the recent incarnation of the audit committee that's been in existence for the last year, there's nothing that's left the committee that wasn't with unanimous full support of all the members of the committee.
So I would also like to say that and no judgment, please. The origination of the audit plan as it is right now does not follow audit standards. That's not the way we're supposed to come up with an audit plan by having 2 documents as our primary input sources. I did read the memo that Mary Catherine provided, that she clearly disclosed that this was her draft audit plan. And in that memo, she clearly disclosed these were the 2 primary inputs along with some conversations. But that is not by any means a full risk assessment, and that is not what audit standards require. So moving forward, we're gonna do what we can to keep moving. We're auditors, we want to do actual auditing. So I do want to kind of move forward with what is already in place, but we will be going back to do the risk assessment and being in compliance with auditing standards. I think that will help alleviate any confusion about where risks come from. We come and we say, here are our risks, and you can feel confident that this is where the risk came from. And that will be a fairly extensive report. I mean, you guys have had a risk assessment in the past, and you know how inclusive it comes from. And there's a very detailed evaluation and rating of the level of risk each risk is. So I think moving forward, once we, and she disclosed clearly that these were the primary inputs, so, I really feel that she was doing the best she could do at the time. But moving forward, we're going to be really sticking to auditing standards because, 1, they're my favorite and I love them, but also it adds the transparency and the independence, and some of these questions may not necessarily have been questions had we kind of did it like that to begin with. But moving forward, we will.
So I'm just want to be mindful of the time. So I know we have some. You can get your question, but I know we have some other board members who might want to ask questions. So if people haven't asked questions, if you wouldn't mind, Scott, waiting for them to
Absolutely.
ask. So
I'm really curious about what's entailed with the contracts audit. I was really interested as I was reading through the contracts, which ones had been directly let, which ones were RFP'd, how those decisions are made. If there's like a dollar threshold, like in some public agencies, a certain dollar figure can be directly negotiated, and there's good reasons for doing so. So I'm really curious about what other activities that entails. What are you looking at?
Actually, we are working to prepare a full brief on the contracts audit for the audit committee, which is coming soon. And I know we're working to reschedule our first meeting, but if you wouldn't mind, because I'm not totally prepared. I have had a briefing with her, but there are some of the initial planning steps that need to kind of go back to backfill so I can feel confident in the selection of what we've already identified. So we really need to do that before we answer your question, but we will be fully prepared to answer that question at our audit committee meeting if you wouldn't mind giving us that little bit of extra time.
I don't mind waiting.
Okay.
I was just reading through them.
There's a
and
lot
I was
to it.
curious.
I just want to be fully prepared.
Yeah, absolutely.
But those are available. There are thresholds.
is that your
Yes. There's actually a training that is required for all of us contractors.
Contract managers.
Oh, contract managers,
Training,
yeah.
so it all states, it's all documented as to what is required, what the contract managers are supposed to be doing. So that's.
I don't have a question, I just want to apologize for the rudeness of wearing my sunglasses inside, but I'm starting to get a migraine, so this helps. So.
Not in relationship to auditing, I'm
No,
sure.
it's the light.
Come
It's the
on.
light.
Oh, I thought you were
It's not
just being
about
super
auditing.
hip.
But she
No.
was shut up.
I totally thought you were
Yeah,
cool.
but
No,
that's
I've never been cool, so why start now?
Doesn't look like he's got kids.
Can I just ask a quick question about risk assessment? This maybe is a stupid question. Do you have a risk management department?
Yes,
So how, do you
I will be meeting with
coordinate?
Bill,
or how does that work?
absolutely. So, in general, risk management department communicates with the board to set the risk appetite. But what I would say, my experience with risk management departments, they're gonna be doing and managing risks totally different than the way we identify risks. So say, for example, how much insurance does a building need in relationship to if somebody falls? Or how much insurance do we need to cover a certain student activity? Those are the very detailed things from my experience. Risk management departments kind of deal with amongst many, many, many other risks. I don't mean to diminish all of the work that they do, but our kind of purview into risk is just slightly different, but I will absolutely be meeting with them to gain an understanding of what risks they've already identified and how are they mitigating them in the form of insurance or many other things other than just insurance. But that will absolutely be one of my many conversations to chat with, yes.
So I'm wondering, Liz, do you have anything you want to add to that? As the office
Also,
that
an
oversees the
management
risk?
person, okay? Yeah, well, I want to be clear, they're very, a department of trained risk management professionals who report up to me. I am not one of them. So, I think it's a great conversation for us to have. Certainly risk oversees insurance procurement as you described, but a whole lot of other, employee safety, environmental risk, broad health and safety risks. So it's certainly not an enterprise risk management function in that fullest sense of the term, but it is, I think it looks across risks in a number of areas, and I think it'll be a really robust conversation for us to have.
Thank you. I didn't mean to diminish. I know you guys.
No,
are-
I think,
okay.
would you say what day
Okay.
so it's early, so we'll get to
Thank
each
you.
other well.
Just two questions. You picked an example to walk through the flow chart. So how do you decide? How did you land on that one? How would you decide on any one to test that through?
Well, yes, for the example today, and it just so happened, it's one of my, on the list of my onboarding things that I need to kind of look at, I was asked to look at in the first couple of weeks. Take a look and see if I have some thoughts, anything I could add to it. So it's just fresh in my mind. I don't know, I didn't.
So it's a board request.
Yeah.
And then secondly, you mentioned, I wasn't sure what to take away from it. You would be looking at the draft audit plan as you be taking another look at it, or it is what it is, or I heard it's based partly on some audits that in some cases might have very well been politically motivated.
So what I would say, thank you, sir. I've agreed, and I think it is fair that we move forward doing the contracts audit that we've already started, and then if time allows, while I'm doing the risk assessment, we'll work on the P-card review. Those were the two audits that seem to have already been approved collectively, so I don't want to, because those audit selection is not based off audit standards, those are the two that I feel comfortable with moving forward with at this point, and then moving forward, we'll do the risk assessment and we'll follow audit standards in the selection of audits moving forward. So it was my understanding that those two audits had kind of already been vetted, everybody felt comfortable with moving forward on. So, because they're not the selection didn't, I really don't like it, but it's okay. We need to be doing something while we're doing this, so I feel comfortable that the selection of these two. But moving forward beyond that, it really needs to be based off audit standards. Does that answer your question?
The reality is also the P-card is not an audit, it's a review.
It's a review.
If I use the term
Which is
correctly.
which is what the board approved. And it was the recommendation.
Okay, P-card review. We'll see. Again, I haven't had an opportunity to really dive into it, but I will. And if for some reason when I get there, it seems way overboard materially, I will come back and talk to you guys about it because it's that important.
And I think you're asking about the other topics that were put on the original or the draft.
Right, I saw a whole span.
Right, there were
possible
we came up with
topics.
I think 7 or 8 topics. So those are the things that we will be looking at again. So.
They may make it to the risk assessment
Exactly.
for reconsideration as future audit topics. We'll see.
They will be revised.
But you're gonna take a full look, a fresh look based on.
Fresh look.
Not just
No.
unbiased audit.
I'm gonna spend a lot of quality time with you guys, and I can't wait to meet with you as well. Look at the excitement, the smiles, like I knew I could win everybody over to auditing. Look at that. He's a believer already.
Yeah, I don't see them raising their hand to be on the audit committee. I know.
I'm really super excited.
So,
Can I think this is an important point to clarify. The auditorial risk assessment as opposed to our risk department assessment. Yeah, so what you're speaking of, who does that assessment? Is that, that's you guys, okay. It's not something we have to budget for outside. And is that a 3-month process, a 6-month process?
My goal is to have it ready by the first of the year. So I would like at the beginning of the year to have my risk assessment ready to present. So that's a couple of months, and really it's gonna be, that's really using all of my energy and excitement to get meetings with all of the interested stakeholders throughout the district. So I'll be using all of that enthusiasm to get that done in that time. Okay.
So I want to close this with just making a note about the committee charter, because one of the things, if Chair Constant were here, she probably mentioned this, which is with the new committees being created by the board, that each committee will go through a process with board leadership in drafting their charters or their jurisdiction, so that we don't have, hopefully avoid overlaps, that we don't have gaps, that we're really clear what is within the purview of their committees. So it's not like this is just going to happen with the audit committee, all the committees. So if you're a committee chair, this is a process that you'll go through, that you'll have sort of a clear understanding what your portfolio and jurisdiction is, and likely a set of deliverables for the year. So it's not just for the audit committee.
I was just doing what relates to me, because everything else revolves around auditing for me.
Just make sure everybody else knew they were going to have to do that. All the other chairs. Great. Thank you very much. And I do know the offer, if anybody wants to take a deeper dive, feel free to contact them.
Please do.
And
There's a
just-
couple I haven't met with, but I will get around. Don't hide too long. I'll keep calling.
What? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your interest.
The next item on our agenda this evening is the board goals, and we have had a whole host of discussions about these. And currently we're scheduled to have a board vote at the next board meeting. So we're in a little bit of an awkward position about how to, in terms of landing it, with we have 3 weeks in which we don't have a board meeting. And we have this set of goals that we're going to go through. The one thing that will be, that's significantly different from the last version of the goals we saw, is that the first 2 goals on 3rd grade reading and 5th grade math now are a growth metric. The 8th grade and the post-secondary readiness are fairly, they look pretty much like they looked like last time we saw them, but the first 2 are pretty different. So what we're gonna try and do today is come up with a process in which we're gonna ask for board members to, at this meeting, not afterwards, at this meeting,
Tonight,
tonight,
Or in the morning.
or it
say,
could-
you know, what issues you have that you need to have to resolve to get to yes. And kind of walk through that process, so we flesh out whether, you know, we're on our path, and then we'll create a timeline over the next 2.5 weeks where we get the next iteration out to everybody and people will have one more look, and we also should post these and share them with the broader community, because that really hasn't happened to date. And we should be able to speak to them, because we're gonna own them, resource them, probably defend them, champion them. So,
So, I'm sorry, can I just, so I'm looking at the calendar. So I have on my, so I think it's only 2 weeks, isn't it?
October 15th. That's 3 weeks.
3 weeks and 1 day, right? It would be.
Right, so, right.
So, Russ, if you could speak to, I think, the changes from the last draft to this draft, which would be, primarily be in the 3rd and 5th. We can have a discussion about that, although we, I think, had a nice preview earlier tonight about the topic of growth. And then we'll go through each of the goals, and I would like people to share, you know, what they need to do to get to yes. Okay.
So I'm going to repeat a little bit just for context. Some things haven't changed. In terms of principles, guiding ideas, haven't changed. We want to have a progressive ladder of skills. I think there was consensus around setting a goal around shifting from learning to read to reading to learn, ensuring that in 5th grade students have the basic numeracy skills in order to be able to go forward. Again, the core components that we're building a ladder towards grad. I also advocated that every school should be able to see themselves in the goals, that everybody should be able to see their role in contributing to the portrait of a grad. And then I've been echoing this point about growth for a while, that we should be setting goals that incentivize growth for all students, and differential growth for students who need to grow more. And I'll reiterate what I said before. Changes in achievement are absolutely dependent on changes in growth. You have to change the growth trajectory first to be able to produce the change in achievement. And the idea here is setting common goals so that we can target resources for those to close gaps. And again, a commitment to a continuous improvement cycle. I don't know about you all, but I don't believe that these are going to be carved in stone and put out in front of the building. I suspect that over time, as we gather additional information, that there will be iterations of this. As we learn, we may choose to focus them more in a different direction. But at some point in a goal-setting process, you have to set a goal and then move towards it for a period of time and gather information formatively and then summatively about that. So again, everything's anchored towards building towards the portrait of the grad. To Vice Chair Graham Edwards' point, have been talking about the need to focus on growth rather than simply proficiency for a while. I think last time I was before you, I talked about some of the challenges in the way that the prior goal was set, and that I didn't really think was realistic. We were talking about tripling proficiency rates in an incredibly short period of time. And while that sounds great, I mean, it's a great talking point, I just don't think it's realistic. And you know, so if we talk about SMART goals and we talk about something that's achievable, that wasn't the case. The other pressure that I was experiencing from that and heard feedback from you all was that, well, we don't want compound goals. As a matter of fact, we had worked with a consultant who really pushed us to have singular goals. So, as a means to focus the board and really focus in a singular goal, that really got at the heart of some of the things I was hearing, which was, hey, let's call out where we have the greatest challenges, and those are with our underserved students of color. And let's talk about what we need to do differently to make that happen. Well, again, we need to change the growth trajectories for these students. We need to accelerate their growth. If we accelerate their growth, we will change their achievement. And the question came up, and I mentioned it earlier, so for third grade reading, had we accomplished this goal this year, again, the proficiency rates would have went up 5.5 points for our underserved students of color in a year when the state went down. And again, it would have equated to roughly 11 and a half additional weeks of learning for each of those students. That is an incredibly ambitious goal, but I've actually seen that done. I've actually seen 60% of students meet or exceed their growth targets, and I've seen that impact on student achievement. It happens, you can have that within a year, actually, depending on how much you accelerate that growth. It depends on how long it takes to get that. But in a fully integrated system where the teacher, and I think it really gets to what the board was talking about, there's a need to educate people about the importance of growth, have parents understand what it means for their students to grow and what they need to do, the skills that they need to acquire during the year, teachers to understand that and set targets for students and work towards that. That will probably not happen overnight. But when that's all in place, when all those pieces are in place, you can see this accelerate very quickly. And contrary to that little focus on just that switch point for proficiency, this doesn't bankrupt the system. Actually, it's an investment. Because now you're investing by raising the achievement of the lowest performing students over time. And that pays dividends over time for them. That was number one on the list. And again, empirically derived just from our data, looking at underserved students, what do we see in terms of their growth rate? It's not adequate, we need to accelerate it. And what level of acceleration would be necessary to produce the types of student achievement that we would like? Current measures, again, this would be anchored to NWA, fall and spring. I would love to be able to wander that down a little further into our students, to be able to have a longer cohort model for them. But again, I think there's a communication that needs to happen with our union and as well as our community as a whole to build that downward. We can look at relationships to other assessments and move on. Other things that can happen that I don't believe have happened to date, we should be looking at periodic reports associated with what we see with the math assessment. So where do we start our year? Fully disaggregated data, so where are we starting the year? What would we expect? Again, one of the things that you heard from me earlier is that data is highly predictive of where students end the year. So what do we see at the start of the year? What do we see mid-year? Are we seeing the growth that we expect? Are we on track for that or not? So this becomes a highly, in my humble opinion, highly transparent model that you see during the course of the year rather than waiting till the following year, anchored to SBAC, and oops, too late to do anything about it at this point in time. Yes?
Can we ask questions along the way?
Oh, hey, it's 10 o'clock already.
Could you hold it? It'd be great to get through the
Okay.
presentation.
Okay.
So again, I think this demonstrates the principles and actions. Again, this is that first step on that ladder towards fulfilling the portrait. It touches every elementary and K-8 building. It sets expectations for all students with differential expectations for those students who need to grow more. And it directly, and again, part of what I like about this is it's particularly absolutely scalable. I can talk about what an individual student needs to do. I can talk about what needs to happen in a classroom. I can talk about programmatically things that need to be done. It works up very nicely. And again, when it works, you see this closing of gaps. Fifth grade math follows a similar profile. I just looked at the cohort of students leading up to fifth grade. What proportion of our underserved students of color were failing to meet the expected growth targets? Again, what would it take to move that forward? This actually would produce a more ambitious pattern of achievement. If 60% of our underserved students of color had met this target this year, their math scores would have went 4.5 points in 5th grade. That's a lot for 5th grade, because as you go upwards with math, your growth targets actually get a little smaller as you go up through the grades. That gain is akin to 78 days of additional instruction and would have raised our proficiency rates by 5.8%. Yeah. So again, I think it focuses in a way that we can monitor in a formative fashion whether or not we're making the types of changes that we wish to see. Again, measures, mathematics, not reading, whoops, typo, sorry about that. And again, we have the opportunity to do continuous improvement by reporting out to the board in a disaggregated fashion. So it's not really growth or achievement, it's growth and achievement, and we can report both of those at the same time, but the target is set on growth because that's what needs to change to produce the achievement results that we want.
Okay, it's not just the goal, it's the actual practice.
Oh, absolutely, and that's the hard part, is changing the practice.
That's what you get to figure out.
This goal has remained unchanged. Language is exactly the same as it was before. The question, I think, was, well, what do we have now? Because we talked about this rubric that really assesses the whole child in a very holistic way, and we clearly don't have that in place right now. That would have to be developed. But what do we have? Well, right now we do have SBAC results, and this really is more of a summative measure, because we want to know whether or not kids are prepared to go on into high school, and what have they accrued to this point in time. So that being said, we do have the Smarter Balance results for that, and we know that at the end of last year, 44% of our students met proficiency in both English language arts and mathematics. So took that forward to 2022 with 51% of students meeting proficiency or career and college readiness cut point, to clear up my language there, in both English language arts and mathematics. As we further develop this goal, we will flesh out the rubric. However, I would still expect these to be anchored as part of that rubric. This is not going to go away, so this can be part of the foundation that we build upon as we move forward. Again, current measures is lagging. We can look at math, reading and mathematics. Again, is proactive. Are we getting to where we expect with that? And we're going to have to build out the remaining portfolio components as we move forward. Finally, post-secondary readiness, again, really hasn't changed. I think there was some confusion as to whether or not this was a single goal or is this multiple goals or how does this work. I was doing my best to honor something that I heard the board say. We wanted to honor different pathways, different ways kids could show up, and give them credit for any of those. So if you made it through AP, you made it. If you made it through IB, you made it. If you made it because you were a CTE completer, you made it. If you did dual credit, you earned credits, you made it. So that's exactly what I did. I looked at the data and I said, well, what can we use as baseline now? Well, let's look at students who successfully participated in advanced placement, international baccalaureate, career and technical education, or dual credit. And by participation, that is, I attended a class, I passed the class. In dual credit, I earned dual credit. For CTE, I completed a CTE pathway. Okay? We could operationally define that a little differently, but at least initially this seemed like a good starting point. These are kids who are taking these classes, going through these pathways, and are successful in them at this point in time. About 89% of Portland students are successfully meeting this criteria right now, which I thought was really pretty impressive. There have been other systems I've been in that would have loved to have 89% of their students successfully participating in AP, IB, CTE, or dual credit. That would have been a feather in the cap for just about any system around the country. Unfortunately, only about 85% of our students, underserved students of color, are meeting that threshold. So the gap's not as big here as we see in some other areas, but it's still a gap. And so I think a reasonable goal would be 90% of students meeting those criteria as we move forward. Now again, this is not a complete profile. I worked with the data that was available at this point in time. We have begun doing the PSAT, but the PSAT wasn't given as a census to this high school senior group. It was a couple years back. And so it's going to be a while before the PSAT rolls into this as a measure. I certainly want to look at arts pathways as well, because I think, again, it's a viable way for kids to prepare for a post-secondary environment. And the COI literacy is near and dear to me, and so I want to see that woven in. But as a start point, this was a good start point. And it's picking up, again, 85% of kids are falling into one of these buckets already. And if we add additional ones, I would expect that we're going to pick up a few more. And one of the things that might be interesting to look at is how many kids, as we move down the road, how many kids are meeting one or more of these pathways, 2, 3, 4. Because we've got kids who are doing multiple things along the way. So I think that's an exciting one. And again, the way it's laid out, we can add things to it, and we can always come back and compare to the baseline, because we can always compare just to those criteria that we had in the baseline as well. So we can look at it apples to apples, or we can add things as we so desire to make it a more comprehensive way of reflecting the ways kids can show up. And I tried to go through that really quickly based on the hour.
Great, so we'll go to questions in a minute. One thing I want to do, just again, move the discussion forward, this meeting, is we've extracted out the 4 goals. So I've taken out of this presentation, each one of the goals has sort of a framing statement and then the goal. So I wanted just to pull that out so we can, again, getting to narrowing the gap of getting to what we all can support. So it's nothing different that was in here, it's just the extraction of the frame for each goal and then the draft goal in and of itself.
But on the last one, it looks like the draft goal is,
It's
it's the by the spring of, not the however only.
oh yeah.
Part of that.
That's, I have more copies of some of them. Okay, why don't we just start with any questions, and then I'd like individual board members to share any outstanding concerns or issues that they have. So, go ahead.
So on goals 1 and 2, it's basically the same question. So we've framed the goals in terms of 2022, and the progress measure is the MAP test.
Yes.
So the goal is pitched 3 years out.
Correct.
So will you be establishing sort of annual interim goals to make sure that you're on track to make the 3-year, to hit the 3-year mark?
Theoretically, we could do that.
I'm not advocating,
Yeah.
I'm asking the question. How do you know in year
It
one
was
that you're?
not my intent to set independent goals for each year at this point in time. It could be done. I would suggest if we don't see a turn of the corner in terms of growth, you can't wait till the last year to see all that at once. It's got to start scaling up.
But there, I mean, I'm assuming this is not going to be linear.
It isn't.
So.
Right.
So, I mean,
I have a
and
question.
what I'm thinking is, it's gonna, you know, you're probably gonna see 1%, 2 maybe in year 1, and then you're gonna get sort of exponential improvement in the outlier, you know, out years, hopefully. And so I guess I'm looking for some way to respond to questions after year 1 when the growth is not eye-popping. You know what I mean? So how will we be able to project over the 3-year period, you know, in years 1 and 2? And part of this is the educational function, and how do we explain it to folks? Like how are we going to be able to explain it if we don't have interim goals, for example.
So can I just jump in, I think, on what you're saying? People without interim goals are gonna fill it in. So 3-year goals, 19%, people are gonna say we should be going up 6% a year.
Yep.
That's what the media is gonna do. So
Yep.
I hear what you're saying, but if we don't set those interim goals, they'll be set for
Yep.
us.
Yep. And we won't meet them because they're gonna be completely unrealistic.
Exactly, because we can't predict the learning curve, because it will be a curve.
Right,
The first indicator is if we don't go backwards and we lose ground, we would be guessing if we did the right work. It may be 4, 6, 9, and, you might see that nice, steep learning curve that comes if you have fidelity to your interventions. It might look different in ELA than math, depending on where you put your focus, because you're talking about the same teachers in the elementaries for sure. So that's why it's a little bit hard to predict, because you would be estimating what that curve would look like for performance. But you definitely want to signal that it's not going to be this divided by 3 years.
Yes.
And if
Yeah.
you don't meet that the first year,
It's
we have the wrong
start all over.
strategies,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it won't work.
Just looking at the, I think that's a management function to set the interim goal. I think we've had 2 board members say they think it's a good idea that management set them so that they're realistic, or, but that we don't, that's not something, we're setting the
Big goals.
the 2022, and heard the board discussion about the benefits of having some interim.
Or narrative that it'll be a curve.
Yeah, and I think what I would suggest is that the board and the community are gonna have more information than they've ever had with respect to this. So we're gonna be able to talk about where kids start the year, we're gonna be able to talk about where they are mid-year, and whether or not we see a difference in the amount of growth and the achievement that we're seeing for students mid-year, and we're gonna be able to talk about that at the end of the year. That is a lot of information, I think, that the community hasn't had, and I think a way to begin to communicate to them whether or not that corner is being turned. So.
Are you on the same point still? Because I'd like to.
The community will only have that information if we have a communication strategy around that, because otherwise, go ahead.
Okay, so I think this is, are you on a different point? 'Cause
I'm so tired, I don't even know, but I do know I have a question.
Okay, because I want to wrap this up, because I think there's a good board discussion. No, wrap this piece up, and so move on to your question.
My question had to do with that curve and what that curve looks like. And I understand the difficulty of doing, whatever 19% divided by 3 is not gonna work, but what do we do, how are we gonna know when we're not on track, and what's the plan B? Are we gonna know, I would say that first year might not be as steep, and then we get acceleration and it gets steeper and steeper in years 2 and 3? When do we know to course correct? At what point, when we flatline or we go down, when do we assess?
I guess
When
we're
it's time to-
gauging the growing capacity of our educators to engage in improvement. So
Okay.
what I'm looking for isn't the scores in year 1. I'm looking to see that when I visit the hundreds of classrooms, that an increasing percentage of them are emulating the practices we hope to see. That's what I'm looking for.
Right. I appreciate that you bring that lens, and I'm, as a parent, I'm like, I wanna see make sure the kids are okay. But yeah, I appreciate that lens, but do we know at year 2 if things aren't working, or at the end of year 1? Do we have an idea which way the wind is blowing on this?
We'll have performative measures all
Yeah.
along the way, there will be progress monitoring.
Yeah, if midway through year 2, we haven't hit 50%,
At that point, we know we are not accelerating at the rate
that we need to, and that, to me, I think is a reasonable, if I were looking for a midpoint that I think is reasonable, you gotta break even at a certain point.
Yeah.
And if you're not breaking even, you're still underwater and you need to continue to invest and push to create that change. And I'm a little concerned, these goals are wonderful, but it's sort of a vacuum. And I'm a little concerned that the order of assembly here in terms of when the resources are coming and when we're actually going to be able to act, the levers are coming after the goals are set, and that's putting the cart in front of the horse.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, that one worries me a little bit.
And that the interventions, they won't be having the desired impact, if we're fortunate, until mid-year of the second year.
Right,
And
right.
they're already expecting us to be at that midpoint. So.
It's not
this is the
necessarily
tall
a
order.
calendar midpoint then, because it would be a midpoint at which point the measures are in place, or those levers.
So this has to be part of our communication strategy, is to say, it's kind of twofold: improving practice with classroom teachers and additional resources that we bring in. And those additional resources aren't there this year.
Correct.
So, I guess I want to just push back. It's great that we have additional resources, but if we didn't have additional resources, I don't think we would say we wouldn't be moving resources to change these numbers.
I would say under the constraints and all of the competing interests, we managed to more equitably differentiate school supports from struggling schools. And so that was kind of a blunt first pass. To get more surgical about the interventions, we're going to need to prioritize coming budget. But we're certainly sort of burning a lot of sweat equity sort of out there in schools every single day to sort of try to elevate practice. It's going to get results.
Again, Dr. Brown has quantified some things around, that's the equivalent of 57 additional days of instruction. Without additional resources, we don't have the budget to do 57 additional days of instruction for all the students that need it.
But I would love for us to prioritize, at least in a subset of schools, 4 weeks of extended learning in the summer, with academic intervention in the morning and interventions in the afternoon, but we're also developing teachers that hopefully we're strategically staffing in those schools. So
Yeah, we can do some things, but additional.
that's 30 more days.
Additional,
there.
I would argue for, without additional resources, scaling back the goals. 20, sorry.
Well, that's
My math's up.
my.
He's got him going 7 days a week.
How, I'm all in favor of aggressive. I'm not in favor of delusion. So, in the aggressive delusional scale, where are we?
These goals.
Did you whiteboard that out?
Is there a flow chart for that?
I want to see an x-axis.
Now, we have to turn to our auditor friends for the flow chart.
That was delusional.
So you said it was 5% for historically underserved students.
Yeah.
And
That's a change in proficiency.
And
So this 60% growth will result in a 5% increase on the SBAC scores? In theory.
This year,
just on that one.
this
bullet
year,
point.
had 60% of our underserved students of color reached this target, we would have seen a 5.5 percentage point increase in proficiency this year. I would suggest that that is a pretty darn aggressive goal. Okay? I have seen 60% growth made. I have seen 70% growth made, but that's really rare. That's really at the tail end of getting 7 out of 10 kids moving that entire distribution is, I think, overly ambitious. If the board wants me to go back to 55, I can do that. You have to do something above 50. It's got to be above 50 or you're not going to close the gap.
You're gonna widen the gaps.
So I
Isn't that
think-
what your presentation said?
If you're below 50, you're going to widen the gap.
So I think one of the things we also need to be really aware of is we've talked about the SBAC scores, and one of the comments we've made is, like when we look at the numbers from 2 years ago, the reading proficiency for black male third graders was like 19%. And so if we're thinking about a 5% increase over 3 years, that means that we're looking at saying to our community, in 3 years, these students will be at 24% proficiency. So we also have to be prepared for, when we were talking about doubling that proficiency, we were concerned that that wouldn't feel like it was good enough. I think it's reasonable because of where we are, to look at the 60% growth, but I think we need to be prepared to translate that to our community saying, this is a long transformational process.
Well,
So it's
yeah,
gonna take-
it means
Right.
that the third graders today at that rate of growth will not see a proficiency by the time they get out of high school, if it's that small. Isn't that what we're saying? We're telling the community?
No.
No, okay.
So-
School me on it,
so
because
I think-
I'm unfamiliar
I
with
think
these.
the other piece is that as the more we hit that kind of a growth target, then we're also moving kids from 2 years lagging
Behind to 1 year behind.
to
Okay.
1 year, which means next year or two, you have a realistic shot of hitting proficiency.
Yeah.
Whereas if we're not reaching those kids, it's just gonna be 2 years behind, 2 years behind, 2 years behind, or
Or
worse.
further behind.
Okay,
Because
so
we're not at 50%, but
the
we
act
just,
of closing that gap will help kids get closer to proficiency.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so I would hope that in the report out of data that we look at the whole distribution and see how it's shifted. And so even though there are kids who aren't hitting, however we're defining the proficiency cut score, that there's, and I'm going this way, left to right, maybe for you,
Yeah.
it's like there's far fewer who are totally lagging.
So I think it's gonna have different, it may have some unintended consequences, because when we say they're not a proficiency, people are like, oh, but like, they could be. But then when we start showing how much growth they have to make, if you look at some of the data of like where high school students are and they're reading at like 6th grade, I don't think that's what people think when they see a high school student not at proficiency. It's like, oh, they're just not to grade level yet, but they're not thinking they're still reading at the 5th grade level. And I think that scattergram that you're talking about will start to illustrate that. Yes, it'll be moving, but it also will, I think, show how far behind some of our students really are.
And again, if we're focusing on that 3rd grade, then should prevent a lot of that, oh, you hit high school on your
You're
3rd, you
completely
hit
lost.
5th grade kind of.
This is why the instructional improvement has to happen across all the grade levels. One, this isn't a cohort-based model. So
Mhm.
the work we do in the classrooms is particularly important because we're not rating the same 3rd graders the following year. So that
No.
3rd year
Yeah.
of goals to see if we met it are
Different
completely
kids.
different crew of
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And so we have to have been doing the work with Fidelity so that from their point of entry, K-1-2, you're seeing the fruits of that labor improvement. Yeah.
so, because really what we're gonna see this year is the improvement in 3rd grade instruction, right? So kids that have a 1% growth at the end of this year will say, we could claim that's, and then next year it'll be 2nd and 3rd grade, and then
Well,
sort of 3-year
kids we were
reworking
focusing on
for
third
2nd
grade
and
reading
3rd.
are the kids, the same kids we hope that produce good 5th grade math
Right,
scores.
and
Yeah.
portfolio scores
That's that
eventually,
crew of
right,
kids.
yeah.
Okay, I want to get super granular, like what, do people have specific pieces of the 3rd grade reading goal that they still have questions, let's just take the 3rd grade, do they still have questions about? Or want to make any changes? Go ahead.
So again, I think this is the first 2 goals. So same question. So if the unit is underserved students of color, moving pretty significantly on the, on the spectrum, can we be reasonably sure that that each of the student groups will have to grow in order to make that good, as opposed to one student group making like huge gains and the others stagnating?
So, I'm gonna piggyback on this, this is a question I had, which is, the goal is written in the terms of underserved students of color, which makes it a group, and you could have one group doing really well and then another one not so well. And so, in Russ's response to my question, which to me it answered the question, as long as we add it at the bottom of the page or somehow footnote it, that the data would be reported in both aggregates and disaggregate, and the reported aggregates would mirror those used for state and federal accountability. So you would be able to see if, like, hey, we're getting, you know, the 5% because one group is getting 10 and this other group is not doing anything. So for me, that answers the question, like, we'll be able to track that, and I don't know if that works for you or.
I mean, I'm fine with the reporting thing. It's a theoretical question.
So
Because we're gonna get asked.
So mathematically, lots of things are possible. I'm struggling to imagine how we would incentivize teachers to be more thoughtful about serving students of color, and we would end up with this massive differential between the groups. Theoretically, I suppose that could happen. Maybe folks would focus entirely on, say, Hispanic students or African American students, and you might see some sort of differential there. I do think, to Ms. Burnett, point, if we're reporting that out, you see it. And then if we need to refocus or reiterate, then we do that.
Okay.
Again, I think at a certain point you have to put a stake in the sand and see where you get, and then if you have to adjust it, then you have to adjust it. And you adjust it based on what data you see.
So that was, I have 3 things about the first 2 goals. Because they're kind of the same in some ways. And one of them was the one that was just mentioned. And so I think if we state that, then we're very clearly signaling to the community that we're not talking about averages, which can kill subgroups.
Well, and to be honest, this is why I talked about underserved students of color and separated out all the students who might fall under deprivation, because had I put those all together as students of color, that would have masked an underlying pattern of lack of growth. So, I mean, there was a deliberate separation of those to reflect the differences in growth observed in those groups. So certainly, if we fail to see a universal growth amongst the groups that we're looking at, then we need to rethink that.
Well, and what tripped me up about that is that we call out targeted universalism here, and then the next bullet point says goals should provide catalytic effort to focus groups for all students. And targeted universal strategy would be one that's inclusive of the needs of both the dominant and the marginalized groups, but pays particular focus, and then of course disaggregates.
And I would suggest,
so we're able to track by race the progress or not, where
and I would suggest setting the expectation that all students are going to grow.
Of course.
Is that targeted universalism, but ratcheting it up a notch, saying some students, we're going to close achievement gaps, some students are going to have to grow more, and we're going to have to align the resources to do that.
Yes.
So my other issue was on bullet one in the goal that we need to add as measured by map, because we don't say what
Totally agree.
our measurement is. Okay, then the third one, and maybe we can say this for later because this is the big topic, is how we talk about how it connects to proficiency.
So again, my suggestion would be that as we report out this data, I think we're committing to be more transparent here than I believe the system has been to date. So we're talking about conveying both changes in growth and proficiency over time. So we can look at mean scaled scores by group, as well as the proportion of students who make growth targets. And I think that's a level of transparency and connection that folks in this community haven't seen.
Which is great. I just think without it, it won't make sense to, it may make sense to all of us, we're educators, because like this is just what we're focusing on, because we know that growth is gonna drive efficiency, but I think there's, you've gotta have it in a piece of paper, but if you're, I think you said yes.
I'm not sure what the ask was.
Report
Is
will
that,
also include.
Absolutely, yeah.
right, and that it needs to be somehow connected to the growth or in the same,
So do you want it to say something like,
not in the
this
goal.
growth, or in the language above, like this, such growth will increase proficiency?
So like I had thought that you could just put it below along with the other note about the data, but just so that people would see it and be like, yeah, it's not just growth, they've got this other piece. I just will your language exactly, set a draft of what it might look like, but not as part of the goal itself, but just as a part of the.
Explainer around, we're
Yes.
focusing on this because we believe it's strongly correlated and predictive of the summative improvements we want to see.
What
Can
is it?
Can do.
Okay.
Can I piggyback on that point? Because I was gonna make this point from larger for all the goals, but maybe it'll save us some time as we go through the next. There's a huge storytelling effort that needs to happen around these goals and around the communications. And well, I really, when we get there, I'm gonna say yes to everything you've got here. And I like where we ended up. It needs a serious communications lens. And there are just things here that don't make sense to anyone outside of, I mean, we don't talk about students must be prepared to read to learn. You guys talk about that. I'm beginning to talk about that because I've been on this board for a couple months. But like, no, you learn how to read.
Your kid doesn't
right?
come
Your
home.
kids learn how to read. And so putting this through a comms lens is going to be so important in terms of how we talk about it. And that's going to require some of the educational professionals sort of wincing a little bit and like, well, that's not really what we're doing, but in terms of how we communicate it, that's going to be really important. And I think this whole narrative, what I'm going to say is, I don't think we should be writing sort of the narrative in terms of how, I think this is what communications professionals should be doing and coming back and sort of saying, this is how we as a district are going to talk about these goals in a way that people understand. So, because I just think there's a lot of work after we adopt these that can be done from that perspective.
I actually think that sometimes our grounding as parents is very useful around, occasionally there's professional communication that comes out that is like, no.
Yeah.
That doesn't really.
That's why you say professional
Conversely,
communication staff.
it's great to have the professionals in the room
Oh,
because,
absolutely.
you know,
I think
thank God we're not
Obviously,
doing
the
this.
distance by yourself during
there's,
back to school night.
So, because I do think when we adopt them, we can't say, well, somebody's gonna fix them up later.
No, like
I mean,
it's-
they have to be, they're gonna be polishing, but I think it has to be enough that the framework is there. So, anybody else, who else has an issue with, or issues they wanna raise or questions on either the third grade or the fifth grade? So I had 3 issues and they've all been dealt with.
I'm happy.
I'm happy to.
Oh my goodness.
Look
at that,
Just
okay.
a nerdy data point.
So
In
close.
terms of disaggregation would be looking at student mobility. We know it has, or can have an impact on achievement. Kids who are switching schools or kids who are coming into the district, and sometimes it's because they're kind of bombing out of their old district. And to see some kind of disaggregation around that. And especially at high school, when you look at graduation rates, I think that's not an insignificant piece of kids who are finishing 4 years, or kids we inherited junior, senior year with very low credit output. So I'd be interested in seeing that teased out down the line.
As we disaggregate, we'll have to look at how we're capturing our coding students. I mean, I think that we shouldn't be calling them out necessarily either. There's got to be a way to see how we can track the students that are here.
Because, for example, if mobility is increasing, then regardless of how we improve practice, it may offset some of that. And I think that's just works.
That's why
Except
we
when we have
want-
strong instruction in every school.
Right, if the
Well,
organizational fidelity is there, then that'll have.
Yeah, I know,
If we're
but we're
getting
not,
kids from North Carolina.
we're not there, but even that transition itself though, regardless of the strength of the program is.
Yeah, that's the
So,
offset from
one of the things that I think is, I couldn't agree more, that there's a strong need for thoughtful communication strategy around this and how we, not just for our parents, but how we're, speaking with our teachers and staff around this as well. There is a lot more than we can do with this in terms of finesse around looking at this data, around quintiles, there are lots of different ways that we can refine this as we move forward. But we have to start somewhere, and we have to start building that data and assessment literacy across the system and across the community before we gotta crawl before we run on some of this.
So, just note for staff that Scott's interested in sort of the question of mobility, but you're not actually asking for a change in the goal.
No.
Okay,
That was-
great.
that was
So
like
I'm gonna move on to 8th grade. So I had 2 items, or maybe 3. One, we didn't have the, we were removing 2, but we didn't have where we're moving from. And you said, we're moving from 44%, so it would be adding in, we'll move from 44% to 51%. So it's just missing. in the
Yeah, I
other-
actually had, to avoid confusion, I had actually collapsed some of this into like 4 goals. But to avoid confusion, I didn't pass it out as yet another document, but that
Yeah,
makes it.
don't do that, please.
Yeah, I thought you'd appreciate me not adding any more paper at this point.
So it's just moving where we're starting from, where we're going to. And the other thing is, this one doesn't have what we're measuring, and we're using SBAC, so it's as measured by XBAC to add that in. So the goal would be that by the spring of 2022, Portland Public Schools 8th grade students will move from 44% to 51% meeting proficiency in both English, language arts, and mathematics as measured by SBAC. You agree with that? Okay. The other issue I had is, and this was based on the discussion I had with Scott today, is sort of the signaling of that we're not just like, this is gonna be SBAC and we're done, but to add something like, by July 1, 2020, a more comprehensive district rubric will be created for this goal, so that we're signaling like, we're not just hanging our hat on SBAC, but to really reach this sort of much richer profile that this year, so SBAC will be a piece of it, but this next year, this rubric, which looks like will require probably some intensive engagement with our school, teachers and principals and educators, to just add that, so it's not just a SBAC goal.
So, my only concern about the timeline for the rubric, again, it's the cart in front of the horse. If we're gonna redesign middle school, I think the rubric should likely be done in conjunction with the redesign. That would be the logical way to do it. Otherwise, I'm concerned that you end up going cross-purpose.
So how about something like, as part of the middle school redesign, a more comprehensive rubric will be created?
Perfect.
Or, the question I had was, could we say something like, in the interim, until that rubric is finished, as a, moving forward on that goal, students will be asked to do an essay or project on the 9 areas listed, which are,
I guess that would require,
Yeah.
should require a conversation with PAT,
Right.
because it will be,
an additional, but those, is there a way to add an interim measure of moving towards the rubric?
I mean, we've only just done one dive into graduate portrait at the 8th grade snapshot,
Yeah.
portrait snapshot, by having all of our 300 school administrators begin to think about past the 12th grade milestone, all these skills, what does it look like in 8th grade, and 3rd, so that we know whether our students are growing in the way we envision them to.
And even that language of saying
Right.
that as part of this is like, I think my concern about the 8th grade one is if we don't have sort of a articulated future vision,
Yep.
whether it's saying this rubric will be part of the middle grades design, administrators are already beginning to have these conversations, because I think then it'll feel to the public like we're just relying on SBAC.
You just want a statement in there that's going to signal,
Like,
there's going to be an instrument in development here.
Right.
Call
And
it a
it'll be-
portfolio, a rubric. that's
we'll have it done by
connected to our middle school
2030 or
design.
whatever.
I mean, it's the richest, it's the richest, I think, description,
Mhm.
the one you get most excited about, and so it seems like
Then
you
SBAC.
shouldn't be like, oh, and then it's SBAC,
Oh,
but
wow, wow.
Yeah.
We want, and I think some.
you thought you were dating her.
That's like totally like Leah and Rachel. For reference.
So
But
I
Getting
agree
late.
with the.
It's getting late.
I'm making Old Testament references over here. I think the other part to this would be.
You're on the spot, and you can't, got anything in the New
I'm
Testament?
just gonna talk about dating.
But to have that language in there, because I think, you know, a lot of time we get pushed back on the, you know, this is, you said you're gonna do this eventually, like give us a little more to hang on to of what the plan really is. And then, because we need to be held accountable to
Okay.
doing what we say we're gonna do. So that by, you know, whatever the year is, 2024, we'll have a robust rubric for this. I think, you know, that would be helpful language.
I don't see any reason why we can do that, and I feel much more comfortable with doing that than trying to do some sort of interim measure and then coming back and saying, oh, don't do that anymore, do this instead, and then don't do that anymore.
Right, I don't wanna like
Yeah.
jerk
That's
teachers
hard
around.
on.
Yeah.
So the language we've agreed to is as part of middle school redesign, a more comprehensive district rubric will be created for this goal.
Is it middle school or middle grades?
Middle grades.
Middle
Well, right now
grades.
it's middle grades for redesign, but I don't want to limit it to a rubric because it'll be some way to gauge students' growth across those areas. So, 'cause it-
I
Whatever
just-
language
I'm
you
just
wanna
use-
have,
I'm just
yeah.
using the language that was in here, so is there something else, because it talks about, where was it? I didn't come up with that on my own.
A capstone might involve a public presentation, a reflection, a performance. There's some rubric that's universal enough to give some.
Actually, there's no mention of either middle school or middle grade students.
And that was my only question too, was on that, on number 3, 8th grade high school readiness, was that there was, how would we measure, you know, that students are prepared, whether that's through a portfolio or, like you said, a performance?
Right, well, if we do this well, we're telling kids that the day they enter in sixth grade, you have 3 years to document your learning journey here.
Yes.
So at different points in this experience, you're gonna get access and exploration, and we would build that.
It
right?
says-
So rubric is like,
It's
it's
right
like a
here.
grading language, right? So
Right.
students will be assessed using a district-wide rubric, but what they're assessed on isn't spelled out, whether it's a capstone project or a.
Well,
Well, it
Marching
says that
band
they're
performance.
prepared to navigate and adapt to high school's complex challenges, embrace discomfort, persist from failure to success through adaptation and growth mindset. And yeah, how do we measure that? I know some adults that couldn't.
so,
We're gonna need some time to think about it, because one of the attributes is core academic knowledge, so we're also gonna
And
want.
yes.
You still have to show
That's the
some
SBAC.
proficiency there too, so.
So is SBAC the measurement, the success measurement for this then, or is it
For
a
now.
combination?
well, it's for the,
It's for now.
for a piece of it.
For
and then-
now it is.
And then building on top of it, you have at the very end of the, sort of the frame up, is successful students will be assessed using a district-wide rubric that measures core academic knowledge, personal reflection, critical thinking, reasoning, problem solving, civic and social responsibilities, leadership, racial equity, and social justice, self-directed inquiry, and self-awareness. So that's what
I'm happy
the,
with that.
that's what the link back to the rubric was as part of, so as part of
Okay.
middle grades redesign, a more comprehensive district rubric will be created for this goal, referencing the
As
rubric.
long as we're being expansive about the word rubric, then
I'm just using your word,
What does
so if you
rubric
wanna
mean?
use something else,
Lovely.
So again, I think the language there is around a measurement tool for, again, it could be a capstone,
right.
but you're gonna have to have some way to measure that comprehensively, and that would likely be some sort of rubric. It could be a portfolio, again, and you're gonna have to have a rubric to measure the components of that portfolio. And given the breadth of those interpersonal skills that are addressed by that, we need to think a little bit about what that looks like in terms of the middle grade or middle school redesign and the implications around that.
So pick a word, rubric, portfolio. I'd only say portfolio might take people back to Sim and Cam.
Yes.
That's not how everybody felt about it.
I was on the 21st Century Council at my high school.
So.
Of course you were.
So it doesn't really matter. I guess I'll look at, what's your preference for the word?
Let's use rubric as a placeholder.
I like the word rubric. I think it's, people think that
Fancy.
means it's fancy.
I
Yes.
want to be
You don't
able
get to say it
to,
every day.
in the end, a student and a parent, to gauge where a student is on the continuum, right? From 6th through their 8th grade capstone, right? Like a little higher on the caring empathy, a little lower on the core academic knowledge, a little more on the, to be able to set up some narrative goals for what are we going to do to sort of move them along the scale in all those areas around the graduate portrait, so we believe they have those foundational skills to persist through high school and have a successful 9th grade year, which often doesn't happen.
Right, right.
And this is,
That's,
some of you remember the, when Vicki Phillips was here and she did the essays across the district, and then had teachers from different schools grade the essays, and they were all over the place. So it's going to be a process to develop, and it's going to be another process to actually kind of get everybody on the same page. And that's, I think, the rubric part, but actually getting that shared understanding is going to be another challenge. I mean, this is not an easy process.
But I think it's helpful to
Anchor
have a little bit of
assignments.
some anchor timeline, at least a little bit in there to help people know it's not just a wish out there in the world, it's something we're definitely working towards.
Well, if you think of the challenge of institutionalizing the common writing prompt
Yeah.
across the district,
Yep.
calibrating the MP scoring,
Yep.
now you're talking about something even more multidimensional.
Right.
Okay, Scott.
Oh, but I love this one.
Okay. Haley? Michelle?
yes, I'm good with it with
All
the
right,
changes.
okay. Moving right along. Good job, everybody. So, post-secondary readiness.
Arts. That's all I'm gonna say. I think we need to, again, that accountability around the arts pathway. We talk about developing it. I met with kids recently, a young man from
Yes.
Jefferson who's amazing and might be he's thinking about running
We're
for
spending
student
a lot of
council.
time with him.
Yes,
Yes.
but you know, he loves band and did band in middle and elementary and middle school, and there's no band in Jefferson. So this like broken arts pathway and that's what he's really passionate about, that's what he wants to do in his life, and yet there's no option for him.
When you're spending your 5 FTEs in arts and dance.
Yes,
Yeah.
so all 5 FTEs in our for dance, so yes, that kind of like, how do we help those broken pathways around kids that are in band, kids that are in choir, kids who do wanna do dance, how do we assure that?
How would we translate that into something related to the goal?
But again, I think if we're gonna say we're gonna work on the PSAT, the arts pathway and biliteracy, are there ways to put some,
I have an idea.
at least for us?
I
Yes.
have an idea. So,
Accountability.
pardon?
How do we put some accountability on saying that that's the continuous improvement?
So I have a couple questions about this area in general, but again, and it doesn't have to be a date, it can be some other, live in something else, but like by, at ours here now, but by July 1, 2020, earning the seal of biliteracy, completion of a CTE strand or an arts, what is the thing? Is it an arts strand or what?
It says arts pathways.
No, I mean, this is like
But-
new
but-
language.
On
Okay,
the,
yeah,
like,
again.
yeah,
So an arts
up here it says
pathway?
arts pathway.
Will be included in the readiness indicator.
Yeah.
By when?
And completion of arts.
Oh, I'm sorry. At this point, my brain is, I'm a morning person. We're way past my brain.
It's almost morning.
Yeah, it's almost.
Yeah,
Say
almost
by
there.
when? What would
We're
you
almost
say?
there.
By
So
2022.
So I'm sorry, I mean, I genuinely lost track of the date that you were saying.
So, I'm going, remember that chart you made in your office?
Yeah.
So this is like trying.
There have been many.
I have a feeling he makes lots of charts in his office.
I meant to take a picture of it. But it's trying to capture that sort
All
of
the
the
different ways that you
matrix
could
of
show.
like, you had 2 APs and maybe 1 CTE strand, or you had 1 IB class and, you know, an art strand, or you had dual credit and a seal of literacy. So a whole bunch of different ways in which students could show where they excel.
By
So-
what date? I didn't get
Oh.
the date.
Well, the date was not that you had to do it, but that
That it would be
there'd be
included.
included in the readiness indicators,
And that's the date I didn't hear.
Mhm.
July 1st, 2020.
Thank you.
We already have the seal, we
Is
already have
that-
the seal by
I don't see
literacy.
that in here. I mean, I see.
What? No,
This
that's
summer.
because I just wrote that in here.
No, I know, I didn't hear what you
I
said.
don't think we're gonna have
We're all
arts
looking at
pathways
different
fixed by
You're saying that by
2020.
next summer, we will have these
By
things
this
included.
summer.
By this summer, like at the end of this school year.
Because we already, like last year, we gave, hundreds of kids the seal of biliteracy. Like, why aren't they getting credit? To me, that'd be awesome. Like, hey, you took 2 AP classes and you got the seal of biliteracy? Like, we already have it. I don't know why we wouldn't give them credit for it. Or they already finished an arts pathway, or a CTE strand.
So I think the question then comes to like equity is, arts pathways are not accessible to all of our students right now, and so I think if we're gonna say this is a measure, then that.
We have to complete all the 4 arts disciplines in every high school.
Yeah, and so
Just
we're
like
not
we
there
have-
yet, and
just like
that's
we
gonna take
have
us a while.
CTE at-
But
Yeah.
it's not and, it's or.
And it's including it in the indicators, so this is a great discussion at the budget time, like, are we funding?
So you saw the arts inventory, you see what the gaps are on that matrix, and there's a tabulation of how many FTEs it would take.
When you also would see it, for example, with Alliance or other schools that don't have some of these.
But there's also an underlying question about Jefferson. If it's a focus school and students there get a lot of opportunities that aren't available at other schools. You know, a focus school has a focus and it doesn't cover, it's not a comprehensive. So we have to think about that going forward.
I don't think anybody would ever argue that Jefferson is like a privileged school because they have all this access to programs. You know, in other words, I don't think there's anything wrong with having an arts, they have an arts program, they have a dance program. It's just, they don't have the music or choir, I don't think. But I don't think that they have a middle college just to say that they've got access to all this great stuff. It's a school that's done poorly for, generations.
And the problem with Jefferson is the pathway, that kids in the feeder schools in elementary and middle
That
have
have
access to
access.
band, and then when they get to high school, they don't have that same access. That's,
Yeah,
and then,
yeah.
like, this young man, going to another school could be an option, but the, like, travel for that is
Yeah.
complex, so.
And I think he came from Ockley Green, because I met with him too. I was
How does
tempted
it
to
all
tell him not
relate
to
back
be a
to the
musician
goal?
for.
Right, but that's the thing, is
Okay.
if we say we're gonna have, I think July 1st of 2020 is way too soon.
Well, it just says it will
what-
be included as a readiness indicator.
What I can commit to, without a doubt, I believe by July of 2020, we could certainly weave in the seal by literacy. I don't see that as an issue at all to do that. And it's something that we'd love to see as part of this, is yet another way a kid can demonstrate their preparedness for a post-secondary environment, because clearly folks who with capacity to speak multiple languages are positioned in a different place in terms of the business world and life and as learners. So I know we can get that done. For all the reasons I just heard here, I don't know that we can operationally define an arts pathway successfully in a way that we'd all be comfortable with on that time.
Is it because we don't have it at every high school
I
yet.
think we're really close.
We're getting there.
Getting
there.
So the other thing I'd like to hear from Aurora, whether, like, we have the ability to
What was the CTE?
measure the CTE pathway, because I, like, looking at where we were 2 years ago and where we are now, where there's like, I mean, it's really, that chart's like totally filled out. Would by July 1, 2020, we have the ability to measure that?
I think we'd have to define what we mean by CTE pathways. So right now, we have a lot of kids taking a CTE course or two, but not in a pathway, so to speak, a series of courses. So we could absolutely, and I'm actually coming to you on November 5th with the proposed plan, which does talk about kind of a pathway option that would be at each school, and so some of those would be CTE pathways.
Okay,
Is
I
that
need
what
terminology
As,
on it.
as framed right now, this is CTE completers.
What if we,
Completers.
Wasn't the completers where they did 2? I forget the
Yes.
terminology. Is that 2?
credits.
Two.
Yes.
So, why don't you just say, it doesn't have to be the same,
It does, to be a completer, it does. Have
so
to
that
be
doesn't
2
seem
credits in the same.
super onerous.
what if we
It's
change
not,
it?
because all of the pathways, the programs of study, I'm sorry, not to confuse language. All of the programs of study that are approved by the state right now and that are earning Perkins funds have to have at least 2 courses in a progression. So to say a completer is 2 courses in a progression is available right now in all of those
Every high
matrix
school.
classes that you're discussing.
And this is something that we can report out now. The question is, can we define in a similar fashion what an arts pathway would look like, and what a quote arts completer would look like, that parallel language? And I'm not aware that that exists. If it does, we can build off of it, but I think that's something that's gonna have to be built out over
I
time.
have a feeling the superintendent and Ailey are gonna like be able to come up with this.
2 successive similar arts disciplines.
You have to be able to win
You
a
have-
dance off.
Oh, you have to be able to like successfully do a marching band show at halftime.
And I
Yes.
think those dance-offs have to happen at 11 PM.
Okay, so
So I have a bigger,
Okay, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so is this goal too low? Do we really believe that, what is the number, 89% of our graduates who have successfully participated in these things are ready for life after high school?
So
I mean-
I'm with you because the data that I've seen of are the rates of students who take 3 college prep classes, whether it's AP, IB, or dual credit, is really low. Like in some high schools, it's either in the low teens or in the single digits. So while the 89% is high, I think it's high because of they've taken a CTE class or something else. So the
And actually,
standard,
the CTEs are completers, so those are kids that have to do,
you have them as completers.
yeah.
But I would still guess that we don't, we
And
have
are the,
very few who take, well,
are the AP and IB kids you have on here, they've taken 3 classes?
No, it's a successful completion of 1 class.
Just
Okay,
one.
so-
So I think that
And it
was,
doesn't include kids who took the exam. So this is only reflective of a student who took the class. That doesn't necessarily mean they then took the exam.
So I think there may need to be some, because I feel like this goal doesn't reflect the reality of what we're hearing from our community around what our graduates are capable of. So 89% seems like, oh, our graduates are just like
We're
so,
there.
yeah, we're there.
yeah.
But that hasn't been the narrative I've heard. So either our narrative is wrong,
Mhm.
or this data point is too low of a bar,
Or both.
or both.
Or both.
Well, one of the, I think, I go back to when I saw this data, the proportion of kids who participated in AP or IB or RCT completers or have successfully earned credit in dual credit classes. It is a very high number. And most other urban systems would be thrilled with this number. Most other urban systems are busy trying to build participation. They're trying to get kids in the classes. We've got kids in the classes and they're passing. Now, could we iterate this goal? Sure. I mean, we could, instead of passing AP, it could be passing the AP exam. It's gonna set a completely different bar. So,
So
I just don't know if we're there yet.
if the student took a D, got a D in an AP class,
Then they're in that 89%.
in that 89%, I would say that there's a lot of that going on. But just as a,
I'll put it this way, when I looked at this, I was a little surprised at how many kids participating in AP also passed the classes. So the kids are doing reasonably well.
well, a D is a passing.
I understood.
Okay.
I don't think the distribution of grades is quite that far south.
No, I think that's pretty rare, but I think it would be, maybe we need, it would help us to see data by high school, for example, on what we have now in terms of.
I mean, Cleveland should have, like, the entire student body, by the time they're juniors, should be 100%, because they're all taking IB English.
And I would say,
Sorry.
okay.
Sorry, I feel like the question though that we need to be asking and answering is, do we like the goal? I mean, we're really deep now into like the iterations. Do we like this idea of post-secondary readiness the way it is here, potentially with developing the arts pathway in the future?
Well, it's not.
That feels like the only question we need to answer tonight. Am I right about that?
So, but I'm with Ailey. I think this is, it's too low, because if the standard is post-secondary readiness, that's a whole bunch of stuff we've just thrown into like 89%.
So getting a D in IB English, does that indicate that I'm ready for the post-secondary world? I mean, according to this metric, yes.
So again, I think Director Scott's got a point. The question is, do you like this set of indicators? And then we can operationally define what cut points we want for those. That's a separate conversation.
I'll just say, I like the goal generally, but I think it needs to have like more structure to it, because I think people will laugh if we say, we've got 89% of our kids here, and they'll then look at a whole breadth of variety of measurements, and they'll be like, those kids aren't, you know.
We don't have an 89% graduation rate.
Well, that's what the numbers
This
seem.
is percent of graduates. But let's not give in to the narrative out there that may not be true. Maybe we actually have a high point here.
This is something
maybe
to
we should be
celebrate.
talking about something we're doing right.
We should just compare it to North Stockness. I looked at all the data, and like frankly, we have a lot more money. They get a lot more kids through generally AP and IB. They don't have dual credit. But we should just look at some other districts, I think, to Scott's point, because I think it will be limiting. I don't know, Joe, if you have, I know we collected this data during the whole high school instructional hours time.
We didn't do comparative districts, but we do have some data with regards to what percentage of students have Ds for AP classes and that type of stuff, because there was some concern about what was a passing grade. And like Scott said, those were more of an anomaly. But I'm tracking your conversation. I'm just not sure entirely what you want.
So I'm going to go back to the OEIB, and one of the things in the achievement compacts is that it had students who, the readiness indicator for college, community college, was taking 3 college level courses, whether it be AP, IB, or dual credit, and PPS's numbers were way lower than a lot of other districts, but so.
I'd like to see what those numbers are. So 3 classes of AB, IP, or dual credit, and then CTE completers. Like, what does that number look like for us? What is that percentage?
And the amazing thing is, I think you can look at Franklin, which is a school that has a really diverse student body, and they've got lots of students taking, well, the whole Advanced Scholars is based on kids committing to take 4 AP classes. They take more AP classes now, I think, than like Wilson, which used to be the big AP powerhouse. It still is,
Is that program
but
still in place?
Yeah, but I mean, it's changed just because the person who read it.
So I just noticed it's 89% of graduates.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not all
Okay,
students,
so
it's
it's
89%
not
of graduates,
89%
that's
of the
different.
entire universe of students.
So I'd be interested to know that, what percentage of students.
So I think Andrew's question maybe is like, do we have the right framework? I think
Yes.
the answer is generally yes, but maybe looking at some of the data to just see if it's rigorous enough? Is that a friendly amendment to? Okay.
Yes, and I mean, I guess I would also say, and if staff in the next couple of weeks can do that, that's great, and get back to us. And if they can't, again, I don't have any problem dropping this while we continue to work on it, because we can bring it back partway through the year. I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of we don't have to have these perfect in order to adopt them 3 weeks from now.
Well, I think we're getting, we have 3 out of 4 done.
Yes.
And so if it's so if I want to get a
Yes.
sense, Rita, what are you thinking?
I think we're close enough. I mean, if we reserve the right to revise it at some point, I think we're close enough. And I mean, this is all pitched to the portrait of the graduates, right? So we're looking at graduates. The idea, I think, is if somebody says, I graduated from PPS, it's supposed to mean something. But PPS is always going to be looked at. I mean, people are always going to be scrutinizing the graduation rate. It's not like we're not going to be thinking about it. It's just like, it's not just a question of pushing a kid through and handing them a piece of paper and call it good. It's like, this piece of paper actually means something, right? And then we're going forward.
And again, I think we were trying to honor the different ways that could mean something.
Right.
Yeah.
So we want to be specific about each of these possible indicators, refresh what numbers we're at, so that we know whether we're being lofty enough in our SMART goal.
Yeah, I would rather see us do, instead of 90% of graduates, do whatever appropriate percent is all high school students.
I'm convinced we should stick with graduates, because we're talking about post-secondary.
I would suggest that there's a great deal of benefit of sticking to graduates on this, because it's a defined pool of students. The universe is known. If you go to the whole high school, I mean, you get all the challenges that you have with a cohort graduate model with kids coming in and out. It really greatly adds complexity to math. And when we were working on this goal or talking about it, I was aware of the potential for this to incentivize folks to want to have kids meet these criteria. But I think there's sufficient incentive to maintain or increase graduation rates to offset any concern about a perverse incentive involved in focusing only on graduates.
And I think doing these improvements will, even if the student doesn't end up graduating, there will be better, more robust high schools for all.
And again, there is no reason that this can't be revisited in terms of the thresholds. Other systems that I've worked in or looked at before would have really been focusing on trying to increase the proportion of underserved students of color who were participating in AP courses or participating in IP pathways. We've got pretty high participation numbers, and it's interesting the proportion of kids who participate do so successfully.
Yay
So,
us.
which is, yay us. And again, back to, we are outperforming the state on SBAC, and the state is actually sort of tracking with the country on that. So again, a little bit better than maybe what people would otherwise expect. And again, I think when I was looking at the proportion of kids who are taking multiple AP classes is pretty high. at some point in the future, could we look at this with a different cut point, having to pass an AP exam, having to pass an IB exam, certainly. But that, I think, is, that's a much different bar initially. And because this is focused on trying to incentivize getting more underserved students of color into these pathways, I think it's trying to honor the idea of trying to get engage and get more kids in those pathways. And once you hit about 90%, then okay, we can up the bar, and now let's talk about how many people are passing the exam, or how many people are taking 2 or 3 or 4. That makes sense. Now we're gonna raise the bar because we want a different expectation. But let's first level the field so that our graduates of color are exiting with the same endorsements that other colleagues have.
I'm gonna try and bring this home in the spirit of Andrew. So.
Can I ask just one, since we already do seal apply literacy, why do we have to wait to add that to the list?
I just didn't have the data yet. To be honest, I'm still working on trying to gather all the data, and my understanding there is some work that needs to be done on that data to have it at a level of clarity that I would want to use for a baseline.
We honor them every year, so hopefully it's based on something.
Maybe not.
So, just to bring up, so I think we have the overall framework. We're going to look at CTE as completers, which would be 2 courses. We're going to maybe get some data from Joe on the
We have the data you're talking about.
APIB and dual credit.
I actually have.
You're gonna answer
I
the
have
question.
that data.
Yeah.
You're gonna answer the question on the seal of biliteracy, and then we have like the music trio right here.
You can form a band.
Maybe you can do what?
You can form a band.
Okay, well, how about if you form a band and come up with a,
Rock opera around our pathways.
Yes.
so you
That's
guys come up with
strings,
something.
drums.
And if you come back and say, we can't come up with something right now, but we'll do a forward-looking goal, how about that?
Thinking Jimi Hendrix, but do you have post-secondary readiness?
I think that Guadalupe.
Have you ever had
experience.
post-secondary readiness?
This is as good as the auditing stuff. Okay.
I'm just trying to get us out of here. I
Okay.
keep
Not
singing,
exaggerating.
it's gonna clear the room.
Well, I just want to make, before people leave, because this is like our last meeting before we're gonna come back, so just to know. So I think the first 3 goals, we have some agreement on language and framing. The last goal, we have a path to land forward. So what I'm gonna ask is that we try and get, by next week, a 90% there, so that people can look at it, and then eventually we get it posted, so that things get posted with enough time that the community has an opportunity to look at what we're about ready to adopt.
I think that's a great
Sounds
idea.
good.
You're asking the board to commit not to blow this up in 3 weeks when it comes back for a final vote.
Right, so what I'm
Commit to
saying is
that.
in a week or so, you will get something, everybody needs to read it,
Respond to it.
respond to it, and then we're gonna post up what it is and, let the community look at it and can put draft on it. Does that work for everybody?
Yes. Thank you for your leadership, Julia.
Okay,